Welcome to this presentation in which we're going to talk about how to format court documents. These are, hopefully that maybe you've picked up on the fact that we've built from the simplest documents to the most complex documents. There's relatively few rules, for example, about how to prepare an email. There's a few more with respect to an interoffice memo, and a few more when we get to correspondence. The letter does become more complex. But the height of complexity, we'll say, is going to be the court documents that we're going to be working on. So this lecture, and it's actually going to be a series of lectures, is going to take up quite a bit of time. I wish we could just kind of carve out one topic and cover them over several weeks, but if we did that, you wouldn't have a final document for that particular week. So this week, you're going to have a lot of lectures to listen to. I apologize in advance. There's just no easier way of getting to the finish line. The good news is, though, this is the last complex category of documents. And so going forward, once you've gone through this group of lectures, you won't have very much more to learn as we go forward. But you will want to use careful notes here. You can't rely upon your memory because we're going to be doing these types of documents for the rest of the semester. If you don't have careful notes to rely upon, you're going to be stuck listening to these lectures more than once, and that's no fun. So as we go forward, please pause me so you can jot down everything that I say, because you might not need that tidbit on this particular project, but you may well need it on a future project, or you may need that information for the final examination. So spending a little bit more time the first time through is going to save you time and going to help you avoid any unnecessary lost points going forward. So let's talk about what a court document is. This is something that we file with the court, usually. In fact, I would say that's what the paradigm is, that these are going to be filed with the court. But that's not necessarily true, because in litigation we have a category of documents that are typically not filed with the court, and those are discovery documents. When there is a discovery dispute, yes, obviously it is filed with the court, but the way that discovery is supposed to work is that that the court never sees it. That, for example, when I notice a particular person's deposition, person shows up, we take the deposition, we're done. The court only learns about the deposition if that deposition comes into evidence, either as part of a motion or at trial time. Now, of course, there's sometimes disputes, and as people say, well, the question you asked was improper, or the answer you gave was improper, or the particular person you wanted to depose was unavailable, or whatever the particulars are. So sometimes those matters do come before the court, but those are supposed to be the exceptional situations and not the usual situations. So when we talk about court documents, we're not necessarily saying for sure it's going to be filed with the court. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about when I talk about that. Let's see here. That's not what I want. Where is that? Here we go. So in this case, these are interrogatory. So this is part of that discovery category. If you don't know your 5 tools of discovery, you need to know them. One is going to be interrogatories. That's what this one is. This is usually the first one that launches. Then we have request for productions, which often launches at the same time the interrogatories do. Then we have depositions, we have mental or physical examinations, and we have a request for admissions. If you haven't mastered those 5, don't let today go by without learning those 5. Put it on your mirror so when you're brushing your teeth, you're looking at those 5 things. This is going to come up in virtually every class you take in the program. You need to know those 5 things, and you need to know them in practice, because people are going to throw around these terms, and in fact there's lots of abbreviations for these terms, and so you don't need to just know the terms and know what their function are, but you need to know how people refer to them. I'm not going to go through the slang because you'll learn that in civil litigation, but don't let today go by until you know these 5. Make a commitment to yourself that you're going to know these 5 if you don't already. So here we can see that because it's a discovery tool, the court's not going to see this. we're still going to put a caption on it, but we're going to address it to the attorney for the other side, or if the person is pro se, meaning they don't have an attorney, we're going to address it to them individually. But we only have this to line in here if it's going directly to the opposing counsel. If it's going to the court, we don't need this to line because we're going to handle that through the certificate of service. Now, when we have a to line, we're still going to have a certificate of service, of course. That's a requirement all the time. But sometimes people get confused and like, when do I put the to in? When do I not put the to in? If you understand what the document's about, it makes sense. But if you're not sure what the document is about, stop and say, I don't know why I should put to here, or I don't know why I shouldn't put to here. That's awesome. That's one of the most important things you can do. So what do you do when you don't know? Well, look through your notes. Very possibly I answered, but if not, email me. It's as simple as that. If you don't know why we do something the way we do, don't stop right then. Spend some time looking for the answer because most of the time it's going to be there. And if you can't find it, don't go to bed that night until you sent me that email. Sometimes my answer is going to be, we do it that way because we do it that way. But at least make sure you know the answer because it's a lot easier to do this stuff if you know the backstory. If you know why we have the to here and why we don't have it somewhere else. If you're simply memorizing, okay, this document we put the to section in, this document we don't, it's not going to stick. You're not going to remember it for any length of time. So know the reason. While there is some arbitrariness in how we do things, there's in most cases a pretty significant reason why we do the things that we do. So if you don't know, don't say, I don't know. Look for 30 minutes, no more than that. If you can't find it, send me an email or stop by my office hours. Don't say to yourself, oh well, whatever. You gotta know this stuff. You, you need to know this stuff to be successful in your career. Will it make a huge difference in your grade whether you know this or not? No. But this is the time to learn the stuff that's going to be huge in your career. So don't let an assignment go by where you don't know everything about that document, that you're not blindly copying it. Now, if you want feedback from me, obviously you can't send it to me, at Sunday at 2 p.m. when it's due that Sunday. So it requires that you plan. So keep in mind, if it's due on a Sunday, do it the week before. At least know what your questions are the week before. And maybe you have a running list. I don't know why we do it this way. I don't know why we do it this way. Gather those questions. That's awesome. That's wonderful material. That's the reason for the class. The reason for the class is not for you to blindly copy this material and say, oops, well, I don't know why we do it, but I'm going to do it because I don't want to lose points. You need to know all of this stuff because this is what paralegals do. This course is the closest experience you get to the nuts and bolts of being a paralegal. So you ought to have a dozen questions for every assignment. If you don't, it's because you've already done this stuff in your professional life, which is awesome, or you are incredibly insightful, or you aren't asking the questions that you have. Don't be that person. This is your chance to learn this. It's a lot easier to learn it right now, and you're a lot less likely to get yelled at. I'm not going to yell at you. But when you're out in practice and you say, I don't know why we're doing this, I don't know how to do this, I don't know which rule applies, your attorney might be a yeller, and you don't want to be yelled at every day. So ask me, and I'm going to say, awesome question. Let's dive down and get that answer. We'll schedule a time. We'll go through every single one of those questions. And I'll be honest with you and say, either I don't know, or there is no good reason, or this is the reason. And the light bulb's going to go off then. So write down those questions and send them to me. If you don't send me the questions, I can't answer them. So let's commit to that for this semester. Let's plan on at least one question for each one of these documents. Unless you really can't think of anything, send me that question. And what'll happen is when I get these awesome questions, then I'm going to be able, and maybe you'll ask a question, gosh, never occurred to me that this wasn't something I had talked about. So I can send it to everybody. And whatever your question is, probably other people have that same question. Okay. So that was one thing I get sometimes. When do I put the two? When do I don't put the two? The important thing is to keep in mind that not everything is filed with the court. If it's filed with the court, no two section. If it's not filed with the court, probably you ought to have a two section. So whether it's filed with the court or not, that tells you whether you're going to have that two section or not. But other than that one difference, whether it's filed with the court or not, it's not going to visibly look different to you. You're going to have the same caption, you're going to have a title, you're going to have a footer, you're going to have a signature block. These are givens. You have to have these in all of your documents. You also are going to have a certificate of service unless it's a petition or a complaint. If you don't know why you don't have a certificate of service on a petition or complaint, email me. But before you email me, think about it, because the answers, so I'm not going to say it's obvious, but if you understand what's going on with the petition, it flows naturally why you don't have a certificate of service. If you don't know, don't be embarrassed. But one of the things we want to do is kind of get that critical thinking going. So think hard. Why wouldn't you have a certificate of service with a petition? Think about it, and if you can't come up with it, send me an email and I'll tell you what the answer is. Sometimes you'll see that there will be certificates of conference. I'm not going to require them in this particular course, although they appear in many documents, mainly motions. But it's good to know what they are, and it's good to know how to format them. And so while we won't be doing them in this course, certificates of conference are an important thing that apply to many documents. So you will want to make sure with these documents, I'm going to just I'm going to italicize them here, that you do them the way we do them in the particular court that you are filing in. This is so important. This is really what the course is about. I will get students who say, well, but in this court, we do it this way. Well, is that the court we're in? If it's not the court that we're in, that is interesting to know, but it doesn't help us complete this, because a court in Florida isn't going to have the same format as a court in New Mexico. All the things we do in Texas are going to be in Texas State Court. It's the only style that we do in this course. I keep it simple just so you only have one system to learn. But that doesn't mean there is only one system. We have the federal court system. Actually, we may do a federal. I don't think we do a federal court, but that would be the one exception. That we might do Texas federal courts. So you only have to learn one system, but we're going to use models from lots of different places. And obviously in those cases, the models are awesome to use, but is it going to help you format the caption? No. Is it going to help you know where and how to format the title? No. Will it help you with the footer? No. Will it help you with the signature block? No. Will it help you with the certificate of service? No. All of this stuff is going to be standardized. What the model will help you with is what I'm going to call the body of the document, the things you ought to talk about in that particular body. So keep in mind and think to yourself as you're working on a particular item, is this something that should follow the Texas state court model, or is this something that should follow whatever's in that model? And if it's in the body, that's where that model is going to be so helpful. But elsewhere, you're going to focus on the mechanics, the stuff above it and the stuff below it. And so sometimes people get confused. So if you aren't sure, hey, do I follow the model or do I follow the Texas state procedure? Again, spend 30 minutes, obviously watch all the lectures, spend 30 minutes thinking about it, researching it, going over your notes. But if you can't find the answer, email to me. Just remember, don't do it the day that it's due or even the weekend that it's due. Give me at least the Friday before. So send me all those emails by the Thursday before the Sunday that it's due. That way you give me some time to pile through those emails. I'm happy to answer them. There are no dumb questions, but I do obviously want you to spend some time thinking about it, positing out the answer, and in your question, tell me what you think about it. Tell me what your theories are. I've thought about it, I've looked at this research, and this is why I think the answer is the way it is. Maybe you're incorrect, but at least you tried. And so I can tell you, and probably most of the time you'll be correct, I can say, awesome job, you got it right, wonderful. But there'll be sometimes where I say, okay, makes some sense what you're saying, but let me tell you how we actually do it and maybe what the logic behind that particular thought process is. So don't be shy and don't submit an assignment until you're 100% or 99% sure about 99% of the document. Give yourself the gift of learning this stuff now. It's not going away. It's going to be harder to learn. This is the moment for you to learn this stuff. It's a gift. It's a really cheap way, really inexpensive way of getting this stuff under your belt, developing those skills. Let yourself be the recipient of this knowledge. Okay, so let's go forward. We talked about how you will need to adapt all of these components if you are using a model from another jurisdiction. So what I suggest that you do is when you get a model from another jurisdiction is don't even take their example of captions or any other things. Just take what I'm going to call the body, take that body and plop it down, and don't even look at how they're formatting the caption or the model or the footer or the signature block certificate of service. Sometimes you'll find that they're very similar to what we do in Texas. Sometimes they're dramatically different. But almost if they're similar, it's even more difficult because then you may accidentally not see, oh, wait a second, they make that subtle difference that when we do, and you're throwing away points. Plus, you're not getting the practice of creating these documents in the way we do them in Texas. And one of the ways to learn how to do this is by doing it. The act of practicing formatting these things is developing those grooves in your brain, so to speak, that will help you be able to recall this when you're out there in the practicing world. Okay, so sometimes people ask, well, when I look at the documents that are filed in a particular court, there's some variation. You're absolutely right. You will find some courts that follow, uh, most law firms follow a set pattern of rules, but in smaller law firms, you might even find there that one attorney does it one way and another attorney does it another way. But you'll see that all documents filed, say, in a Collin County courthouse are not identical, even amongst the major law firms in a particular region. So there is some variation. But one of the things that you're looking for when you file something is you want your document to be something that blends in. You want it to be unremarkable. You want, when the court sees it or when opposing counsel sees it, for them to think, oh, normal format. I mean, for it to be a non-issue. If your formatting is quirky or different than the usual format, you're drawing attention to the format instead of your content. It would be a little bit like when you get an email or say a text and it's all in caps. The first thing you notice isn't what the person is telling you, but you notice all the caps and you're thinking, is this person really mad at me? What's going on here? You're focusing on the format instead of the contents. The same thing happens with court documents that are not in the usual format. Probably the clerk's going to accept them unless they're really strange. But when the court gets it, the court is going to be, uh, you know, unconsciously focused on what a weird format, what a strange way of doing it. And so you are distracting the court from the strength of your arguments and the substance of what you're trying to present. That's a bad thing, obviously. The second bad thing is that you have reduced your credibility with the court because the court's like, well, gosh, if they don't know how to put together a caption, what else don't they know how to do? They're obviously either not very competent because they don't know how to set up the caption right, or they don't know how to set up the signature block right, or they're sloppy. So it's either ignorance or laziness. And so what other examples of ignorance or laziness are in this document? You've done a pretty significant detriment to your credibility. Um, Sometimes what courts will assume when they see that you aren't formatting your documents the way that they're used to seeing them is that they will assume that you're maybe from an out of town law firm. That's especially when they drill down and see, ah, this is a law firm in Houston, or this is a law firm in El Paso, and let's say it's filed in Collin County. And there's just a natural tendency for human beings, really, to kind of side for the hometown team, right? And so you are making yourself kind of a bit of the outsider, and you're making it really obvious by not formatting your documents right. So you want your documents split. You want nothing exceptional about your document document style, excuse me. You want it to be bland, boring, unexceptional, nothing that stands out. And that's one of the things that I'm going to try to do. So really there's two themes. One is bland, boring, unexceptional. The other thing is very professional looking. It looks crisp. It looks like somebody knew what he or she was doing when he or she typed this document. So those are the two concepts, professional and boring. So when you're going about doing this, one of the things you're going to want to do is see, well, how do people file documents here? Look at lots of documents so you have the flavor of what happens there in the court. Okay, let me talk a little bit about the cover letter. The cover letter to the clerk is something that used to be tremendously common. This would be literal, like, where you probably submitted a resume at some point and you have a cover letter to the resume, and it's just a short letter that introduces the resume to the reader. It might highlight certain facts or might tell a fact or two that's not on the a resume. It's an introduction, so to speak. But a cover letter isn't just for a resume. It's probably the most common time we refer to it, but a cover letter is for any time that you are mailing a document to somebody else and you want to introduce the document to the reader. When you mail something, you need to have kind of some letter to put this document in context. And so that is what the cover letter is about. Um, Now that most documents are electronically filed, the cover letter is somewhat dying. It's not nearly as common to have. But if you are filing something with paper, you still do need that cover letter. Sometimes when people file a cover letter or send a cover letter, they aren't quite sure who to send it to. They think, well, maybe to the judge. After all, the judge is the one who's actually going to handle my court documents. Or maybe they think the court coordinator, the judge's right-hand person. Or maybe to the court clerk. After all, that's the person within that particular court who's responsible for keeping all the paperwork straight. Well, none of those people are the person who receives the official document that's filed. The clerk function is centralized typically within a county. So Collin County has a district clerk, and that district clerk is an elected official. Anyway, oftentimes she's a woman, and certainly can be a man. So, for example, her name is going to be the Honorable Stacy Kemp, for example, who is the Collin County District Clerk. And she's not just for one clerk, she's for all of the clerks. Because, when you're filing that first document, nobody knows which court it's going to be assigned. It's going to be assigned typically on a random system. And so if you were to send it to a particular clerk, the clerk will be like, well, I don't know if maybe we'll get this case, maybe we won't. So you file everything centrally, and then they're sent off to the particular courts. So you don't actually send it to the judge or the clerk for that particular court. Sometimes people think, well, what about this civil cover sheet? Should I send one of those? Well, that is often required in Texas district courts, but it's a different thing from a cover letter. A cover letter is literally just a letter saying, hey, attached is the document that we want filed. But a civil cover sheet is actually, and you see a lot in federal court, where you have to fill out a form and tell the clerk exactly what type of case it is. And so you're literally just putting X's and things in boxes. So if you're not quite sure about the differences between the civil cover sheet and a cover letter, please reach out to me because that is a distinction that is important that you get your heads around. Okay, now we're going to turn from this is kind of our discussion of what we need to know about globally about these documents. I'm going to pause for a second so you can pause me and so that you can write down all this information. Okay, now that you've unpaused me, I'm going to go ahead to our next section, which is how we're going to format the global document. So we're starting with our document. There's kind of two ways we might be starting. One is we might be starting with a model. The other is we might be starting from scratch. So let's assume we're starting from scratch. So let me just open up a document here so I can play along, so to speak. I'm going to go to New Documents. I'm just going to go through our checklist here. So I'm going to make sure our margins are 1 inch around and that we have Times New Roman 12 point and that the font is black. So let's do that. I'm going to go up here to the margins. I'm going to go to Layout, Margins. It is normal, 1111. I'm going to go to Times New Roman. I have it set on black, so I can check it to the side. I'm going to turn off any spacing before or after paragraphs, so the words add should be visible. There we go. Let's go look at the formatting here. And so I'm going to go here and we can see add and add. Actually in the wrong document here. I'm going to go here. So we have add and add, so we're good. But look, it's the wrong spacing because we're supposed to start 1.15. Okay. If you're working, okay, whether you're working from a model or not, I still recommend turning on the Pilcrow from the very beginning. It annoys some people, and so it's okay if you choose to wait to turn it on until the end. That's fine too, but you will need to spend a fair amount of time at the end with the Pilcrow sign on so that you can clean up the formatting issues. Do not use letterhead for court papers and check the local rules and practices. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So what I did to find the local rules is I went to the Collin County text.gov and I searched for the local rules, and here we have them. And they're called the rules of practice. So I went here and here we have our rules of practice. And I'm going to go ahead and scroll down. You can see it's actually approved by the Texas Supreme Court. You can see all of the justices at that time signed. The one that I want to draw your attention to is Don Willett. He runs a really funny blog that lots of legal writers like to follow, and he's also a very insightful judge. He has been mentioned that he has been, or it has been mentioned that he has sentenced on the short list for the U.S. Supreme Court, or at least for the Fifth Court of Appeals, and so he's kind of an up-and-coming judge. So Don Willett's all that, kind of a neat guy. Okay, so let's go forward, and here are our local rules. I'm going to go forward, though, to where we have about the document requirements, because since we're following in Collin County, or we'll say we are, this will tell us the rules. This tells us what our footer needs to be. So we need to have the name of the document, and we need to have the page number. We need to have a one margin all around the document. Then it tells us about what we need in the signature block. Those are probably the most important things to look to. You might find that there are other jurisdictions, even within Texas, that have a different requirement in these areas. So these are good to know so that you don't make any mistakes. But even with these rules, and you can see there aren't a ton of them, there's no descriptions of what your caption ought to look like. So you could be fully in compliance with the rules and have a caption that is completely not what the court is used to seeing. Now, is the clerk going to reject your filing under those cases? Probably not. But again, you're still going to have that moment where the court's like, what is going on here? So it's good, beyond looking at the local rules, to Google and see what documents in this jurisdiction typically look like. Okay, now if you're working from a model, that's item E, you're definitely going to want to turn on that Pilcrow so you can remove any inappropriate formatting. The models that I have in this class intentionally have formatting problems. If you don't turn on the Pilcrow, you won't see them. They are oftentimes not obvious until the Pilcrow is turned on. This is just to get you in the habit of recognizing you need to clean up the formatting so that you don't end up having a document that's not going to look right. It looks close to right, but doesn't look quite right. So you can do that at the beginning or you can do it at the end. If you do it at the beginning, you're still going to need to do it at the end. Probably the single most important thing for the Pilcrow is going to be the fact that many times people use the space bar instead of the tab key. So keep that in mind. That's a very common error. But there are lots of other errors you'll find, and many times in documents. There's all kinds of weird format lurking in documents. And it's just a good idea to get rid of that so that going forward, even if it doesn't impact your document directly this time, eventually it will. And just better to get it all cleaned up before you submit it. Anyway, just keep in mind, I will turn on the Pilcrow and I'll see the error. So don't let one of those lose points simply because you forgot to turn on the Pilcrow. So do it at the beginning and do it also at the end. And again, that's especially important when you're working from a form. The next thing that we're going to talk about is setting up the footer. Okay, so we saw that we need to have both the name of the document and the page number in the footer. Now, for the footer, we can use Times New Roman 10 point or you can use 12 point. It's really whatever you prefer. I'm going to use 10 point though for the footer. You need to give the title of the document and you need to include the page number. Now, local rules don't require that you give the total page number. We saw it just requires the page number. But it's a best practice to give the total page number because if someone prints it up, you want them to easily be able to see how many pieces of paper they ought to have. Okay, and so let's go ahead and do that. So I've done it once. This is what we want our final version to look like. Oops, sorry, the wrong one. This is what we want the final document to look like. I'm going to click on this. You can see that I have it in Times New Roman 10 point. I have first original answer, and then I have page 1 of 1. Turn that off, and that's what it would look like. So that's the look that we're going for. Let me just show you how I get that look. So I'm going to go to this document. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do insert, and I'm going to do footer. I'm going to do the 3 category footer. Now, the first thing you probably are seeing is that even though I have Times New Roman up here, I have a sans serif font here, Calibri. So I'm going to change that in a second, but actually I'm going to do it before. Here we go. Well, okay, I'm just going to type plaintiffs original, we'll say first original petition. You can see the red underlining means I have a typo. Then I'm going to click right here, and I'm going to go up here to Insert and go to Page Number. I'm going to choose Current Position, and I'm going to scroll until I see one that I like. And this is the one that I like, Page 1 of 1. So now I'm going to remove those extra things, and now I just need to get the right font. So I'm going to go to Times New Roman, and I'm going to go with 12 this time. And so we can contrast how they look different. So this is Times New Roman. Let me get rid of the Pilcrow. This is how it would look if I did 12 point, and this is, oh wait a second, that's me clipping here. Yeah, this is smaller. Okay, so it's a quick thing to do. If you forget how to do it though, just refer back to this lecture. You might want to note the minute on the video so you can find it quickly. If you're not quite sure, you will remember how to do that. So one thing to keep in mind is that when you're making those changes, especially if you're working from a form, is you're going to want to make some global changes so you get all the fonts right. The way you make global changes is let's just go to this document right here. Let's say I wanted to make a global change to this. Well, one thing I could do is I could do that and highlight the whole document to make whatever changes I want. But, and that works if you've got a very short document. But if you have a document that's 10 pages long, it takes a long time to highlight everything. So another way of doing it is to go over here to Select and hit Select All. Select All selects everything but the footnote, or the footer and the header. It doesn't. So Select All is kind of not correct because it's not going to select the header or the footer. So if I wanted to change this, I don't know, to bold. You see everything is bold here, but down here it's not bold. You can see. So you always have to go back into your footers, and if you have headers, and make those changes. Now the Select All isn't going to work for removing spaces. That's not a thing that's going to really help there. But let me show you one tool that you can use if you're worried about the spaces. Obviously you can just turn this on and see for these errors, but another thing you can do is you can go to Find and just do space, 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 because you should never have 3 spaces together. And so you can see it found the one time where I had more than 2 spaces. If you happen to use only one period between sentences, then you could get away with just doing 2 spaces. So that's a way to kind of make it easier for yourself to see you're not stuck kind of straining your eyes. Another thing that's helpful is to blow up the screen so you can see it easier. Okay. So at this point we have completed our first activity. We have learned about generally about court documents, and we've learned how we should set up our format for that first page before we even get started on the document. Oh, one more thing I wanted to flag. I forgot to talk about this. You'll see in some models, typo there, in some models, you will see that they will have terms like this, defendants and plaintiffs, and they will have the S inside parentheses. And of course, you're probably familiar with this. What it means is, well, we don't know whether there's just one defendant or whether there's more than one defendant. So we're setting it up so it's going to be correct either way. And that makes a lot of sense for a form because some cases are just one plaintiff versus another plaintiff, or one plaintiff versus lots of defendants, or lots of plaintiffs versus one defendant, or all the other iterations that you could have. So it makes sense for forms to be that way. But when you are preparing the document, I mean, you know how many plaintiffs there are, right? You know how many defendants there are. And so you should never have this actually in your final version. In the model is great, But let's say there are two defendants and one plaintiff. Well, then this is how your version is going to look. Now, when you make this change, you have to watch, and this is true for any model, when you make a change, you have to make sure that you also look at the verbs, because this is probably written for a plural plaintiff. Well, if we say plaintiffs, plaintiffs have, or plaintiffs do, but a single plaintiff has and a single plaintiff does. So if you just change this but don't change the verb, it's going to be very jarring and it's going to be a pretty obvious typo. So go ahead and read that whole sentence to make sure that it makes sense now that you've corrected that. So at this point, we are done with our first lecture. Yay us. We're now going to go on in our second lecture to actually begin the process of formatting our caption. So look forward to spending some time with you in our next lecture. If you would like to, you can go directly to that, or take your time and visit at a later time. Thanks for your attention. Have a great day.